Dr. Blizzard, today I want you to talk to us about that little word righteousness. We read in Matthew 5:20, it says, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, Sophrim, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. And we have this idea of being righteous as being good or quote-unquote holy, doing right, being the perfect person. What does it really mean?
Well, that's actually, Stuart, a very complicated subject. But I have here before me the Jewish Encyclopedia. And let me just read from this one statement right here concerning righteousness. It says, the importance the rabbis attached to the mitzvah of tzedakah can be understood by Rabbi Assisi, who stated that tzedakah, or righteousness, is as important as all the other commandments put together. And that was from Baba Batra.
So explain to the audience what is a mitzvah.
Mitzvah is a commandment. Actually, I hate to even use the word commandment because mitzvah means basically a good work, something that a person is obligated to do, not just towards God, but towards their fellow man as well.
So mitzvah tzedakah would be a good work of righteousness, yes. Whatever righteousness means in the biblical text.
Yes, and there's many different layers of meaning associated with this word righteousness or tzedakah.
So what is it that we need to have that exceeds that of the Pharisees? What quality is it that we need?
Well, they were neglecting their obligation towards their fellow man, towards their parents, as a matter of fact. And you can remember, I'm sure, where Jesus upbraids the scribes and the Pharisees for saying that an offering was a korban, and that they couldn't offer it then to the poor or the needy. And they were doing this as far as their parents were concerned. Interesting thing, sad note, is in our archaeological excavations at the Temple Mount, we found the leg off of a bowl that had the word korban written on it, which testified to that particular practice. It gave us archaeological evidence that that was actually being done, that instead of offering the gift of whatever it might have been to their parents or to whomever, they wrote korban, which means a sacrifice, on it, that if you offer that to God, then you can't offer it to somebody else because you've already given it to God.
So this was a way around giving away whatever they were supposed to give away.
That's correct. Now, let's go back to the Encyclopedia Judaica and look at the entry here for charity, or tzedakah, because I think it's interesting and it will give us some insight as to what it means. It says that the word tzedakah literally means righteousness or justice. By their very choice of words, the rabbis reveal a great deal of their attitude to the subject, for they see charity not as a favor to the poor, but something that that they have as a right, and the donor an obligation. In this way, they teach that the poor man does more for the householder in accepting alms than the householder does for the poor man in giving him the charity. The attitude stemmed from the awareness that all men's possessions belong to God, and that poverty and riches are in His hand. This view is aptly summed up in Pirkei Avot 3 and 8, "Give unto him of that which is his, seeing that thou and what thou hast are his." And is further interested in a story told of Ravi, a poor man, came before Ravi, who asked him what he usually had for his meal. And the man replied, "Fatted chicken and old wine." "But do you not," said Ravi, "feel worried that you are a burden on the community?" "Do I eat what is theirs?" said the man. "I eat what is God." The point that Ravi brought to him a gift of fatted chicken and some old wine, which Ravi understood to be an omen, and apologized to the poor man. The whole purpose of this is to illustrate that one is benefiting from giving charity to the poor more than the poor is benefiting from receiving the charity.
So it's a privilege to be able to perform that mitzvot, that act of kindness on behalf of God. So the poor man is actually providing us a way to be obedient to God in doing what He's commanded us to do.
Well, that says right here, charity should be dispensed to the non-Jewish poor in order to preserve good relations. However, charity should not be accepted from them unless it is entirely unavoidable. Women take precedent over men in receiving alms, and one's poor relatives come before strangers. The general rule is the poor of your own town come before the poor of any other town. But this rule is lifted for the poor of Eretz Israel, or Israel, who take precedent over all. In other words, they had different concepts of who should give charity and who should receive charity, and it was a lot more defined than what we ordinarily think. And one very famous rabbi, with whom I'm sure you're very much acquainted, Moshe Maimonides. Maimonides, who's also known as Rambam, came up with an expanded concept of charity that he called Gemilut Chasadim. That is the giving of the righteous, the person who was more spiritually oriented than another. They had a concept of charity that even went beyond what the average person or the ordinary individual had.
And let's just pause for a moment there for the sake of our audience. So we started off talking about righteousness, but we're talking about giving and performing acts of charity. So it looks to me as if this word righteousness has a whole lot to do with giving.
It had very much to do with giving.
I'm going to want you to go into the different forms that it takes for our audience sake, and we're going to do that in the next segment. And just remember, if you're enjoying this broadcast, to hit the share button so that you can share this with others and they can also benefit from the information that we're sharing today. We're talking about righteousness, and we'll be back with the second segment. So we're talking about righteousness, and I'm speaking with Dr. Roy Blizzard. And in the first segment, we said that in Matthew 5, verse 20, it talks about our righteousness being more than that of the Pharisees and the scribes. And just so that the listeners can see which word is used in the New Testament text, if you could read, Dr. Blizzard, the Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, and let's just see which word they use for almsgiving in this.
Ishamru lachem ma'asot tzidkatchem lifnei bnei adam למען יראו אתכם, ואם לא, אין לכם שכר מאת אביכם שבשמיים.
So the word used for almsgiving
is tzedakah.
tzedakah.
Tzidkatchem.
So tzedakah, the Hebrew word which we translate righteousness, has a whole lot more meaning than we ascribe to just simply the word righteousness. So I'm going to ask Dr. Blizzard if he would continue just to explain this word to us from the Hebrew text.
Well, it's one of the most important concepts in the biblical text. And it's translated into English as charity. And there are several different kinds of charity, several ways in which we express our charity, but it is one of the most important aspects of biblical faith. And when it says, do not let your alms giving, it's not talking about almsgiving as we think of it. It's talking about charity. It's talking about the way that you express your love for God, but the way you express your concern for your fellow man. And a person could go to the Jewish Encyclopedia or to any number of dictionaries relative to the Bible studies, and look up the subject of charity. And you'll probably not exhaust all of the different meanings of charity or the ways of expressing charity. But I have one little book here that is one of my favorites that I want to mention and to show our listeners. This is a little book entitled Every Man's Talmud. Every Man's Talmud. And it's just a little condensation of Talmudic literature. We would be looking at probably 25 different volumes Talmudic literature, and here we're just looking at a little book here of some 300 and some pages, but we can turn to the book that has to do with one's moral life, and we can read about charity, And I think it would be good for us to just take a look in this little book that's called, again, Every Man's Talmud, and it's a major teaching by rabbinic sages by Abraham Cohen. And it was written for a Jewish audience, not for a Christian audience, but it's got information here that is extremely valuable for us. So we're going to go here to this little book, Every Man's Talmud, and to look at some of the statements that are made here relative to the subject of charity. Here it says, an act of charity, accordingly, not only helps the needy, but confers spiritual benefit upon the poor, upon the giver, more than the householder does for the beggar does for the householder. And it's interesting to look here in this little book at some of the ways in which charity is expressed, but one of the interesting aspects of charity, almsgiving, or the giving to the poor, has been treated as gemilut chasadim, which means the bestowal of loving kindness. And let me again quote here from this little book. It says, gemilut chasadim, or the bestowal of loving kindness, is superior in ethical quality and of greater value to mankind, because it's one of the three pillars upon which the social order rests. That's from Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the Fathers, 1 and 2. The two phases of charity are thus contrasted. Greater is benevolence than alms in three respects. Almsgiving is performed with money, but benevolence with personal service or money. Almsgiving is restricted to the poor, and benevolence can be displayed to poor and rich. Almsgiving can be done only to the living, but benevolence can be done to the living and to the dead. Gemilut chasadim, accordingly, comprehends all those kindly deeds which alleviate the burdens of the afflicted and sweeten human relationships. But certain acts receive special mention in this connection. One of them is the entertainment of welfare, of wayfarers. It, together with the visitation of the sick, is specified as a virtue of which man eats the fruit of this world, and the capital remains for him in the world to come. Of hospitality to needed strangers. Also praiseworthy is the taking of charge of orphans. Another act of benevolence which was highly praised was the helping of brides, especially poor brides, and providing an adequate wedding dress for them, and assistance in assuring that the wedding is fulfilled. Another aspect of Gemilut Chasadim is visiting the sick. Another feature of benevolence that receives a special commendation. Whoever visits the sick, it says, takes away 1/60th part of his illness. Whoever visits the sick causes him to recover, and whoever does not visit the sick causes him to die. Now, I think this is interesting in that in the biblical text, it says specifically, is there one sick among you? If there's one sick among you, what are you supposed to do? Call on the elders and let them anoint their heads with oil and pray for the sick, and the prayers of the congregation for the sick will cause them to recover. And that might be something that the church might start to practice, if they're not already doing it, is praying for the sick, for the simple reason it says whoever visits the sick causes him to recover, and whoever does not visit the sick causes him to die. The highest of all benevolence is performed for the dead, in view of the fact that you're not ever going to get anything back from doing acts of benevolence for the dead, but it has to be done with pure motives. But that gives you some idea, I think, Stuart, as to the whole concept of charity, which goes beyond just doing a kind deed or a deed of kindness or assisting someone in need, but it goes into the whole attitude that the believer has in relationship to their fellow man.
Right. So it's really important that we understand the background and the context and the culture of these words to be able to understand what we're reading in the text. So when they asked of Yeshua, they said, Master, what is the greatest commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, which we know is a reference back to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And then he said, and the second, so second to loving God is, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself, which is also a reference to a scripture, and that is to Leviticus chapter 19. And the whole chapter is referred to by Yeshua, not just that verse. When people heard that verse, they knew it was referring to the chapter. And if you read it, it is a chapter that has a lot to do with taking care of the poor and of the needy and of the sojourner in your community. So thank you so much for your insight. Remember, if you're enjoying these broadcasts, to hit the share button and share this information with others that you know. Thank you so much.